Hello, and welcome to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. In this podcast, we explore and dive into the stress-filled world of high conflict divorce and relationships. We offer solutions to calm your world down and allow for greater positive engagement with your children and the people around you. If you find value in this commercial and advertising-free podcast, please consider donating by pressing the donate button so we can continue our helpful work. Thank you.
Hello, welcome back to Unveiling Self podcast with Eric Schoberg and my guest Brooke Olson. We are talking about something that's been fascinating me since I found out about it early 2000 when the pandemic started, called adjustment reactions, which is a little different than adjustment disorder, and we'll go into that. But it can help us understand what's going on when we get overwhelmed in a pretty exponential way. So, yeah. You're up.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson. And this week, my guest again is Eric Schoberg. I want to thank everybody again for your continued support, listening to these podcasts as they roll out weekly. And for those of you that have continued to donate to this, I want to send out my special appreciation for that as well. This week is going to be episode 193, Adjustment Reaction, Catastrophic Thinking, and Sense Making. This is a really, I think, an important subject. Eric brought this to me a couple of years ago as we were entering the pandemic, and it's taken me a while to start to understand it. So we're going to unfold this a little bit for you. Eric's got a lot more information in this one than I do, and I hope that you guys take this in, work with it, and enjoy this particular episode. So, Eric.
So, adjustment reactions. Where I found it was someone posted an article by Peter Sandman, who's a researcher and speaker on some of this stuff, early 2000, not long after the pandemic started, and I found it an extraordinarily powerful tool for me to get reoriented each time something overwhelming was happening. So we were having this pandemic coming on. I was an early enroller in seeing that, fortunately, or unfortunately, and being pretty overwhelmed by it and getting, some of my past trauma triggered, and I would go into shock, and then I would kind of navigate it and shake it out and get reoriented. And then I was able to help some of my clients navigate that, and my friends, Brooke and others, to help them kind of track what's what in this. And then I would get another layer of it. Like, it was kind of, in a way, it was the frog in the pot of boiling water. It kept getting hotter, and each time it would get hotter, I would be triggered again in some way, and kind of get overwhelmed for days or a week or two, and then kind of landed and then be there as others around me were just getting hit by it. So, for better or worse, I was kind of ahead of the curve on being overwhelmed. And so I think what we're doing here today is wanting to share this with you, because this process of us being overwhelmed as a country, as individuals, as, participants in life, seems to be continuing in different ways. And, what I'm finding more and more clearly is that there's a practicing thing here where we can kind of get oriented. Okay, now I understand, how to get oriented to COVID and the extraordinarily hard things that brings for some of us, and the very different ways that it comes to us. And where we think that we're getting the hang of being overwhelmed, and what happens is the overwhelm comes in a different costume that surprises again. And so this process is ongoing. And just because I kind of have the hang of being oriented to COVID doesn't mean that, the prospect of civil war or world war or climate change or any of these very large things that threaten, or that, my own personal life, a dear friend of mine getting cancer and, moving, and lots of different, like every time I turn around, there's something else that's kind of intense.
That's what I love about talking to you every morning. It's my early wake up for intensity. It's like, what's going on? Down the rabbit hole.
That's
So
right.
my adjustment reaction is just continual.
That's right. And he keeps coming back and talking to me most
Yeah, I
mornings.
know.
So, yeah.
Talk about nuts.
Right.
So
Yeah. So what Brooke and I were talking, and what we're going to do here, what I'm going to do is read to you this initial article that I found. It's not very long, but it's, Peter Sandman really seems to have a good handle on the language about this stuff.
yeah, he brought it together really nicely in this article.
Yeah. So his website is psandman.com, and the name of this article is Adjustment Reactions, the Teachable Moment in Crises Communication. So I will read it here. When someone first learns about a new and potentially serious risk, the natural, healthy, and useful reaction is, in a sense, an overreaction. Bullet point 1. You pause. While you wait to see what's going to happen, you may stop doing things that suddenly feel dangerous. After 9/11, some people quit flying for a while or stayed away from skyscrapers. During the anthrax attacks, some people hesitated to open their mail. When a U.S. cow was discovered with mad cow disease, some people briefly avoided hamburgers. It's important also to put this in context. This was written in 2005, January 17th of 2005. So long before COVID. Bullet point 2. You become hypervigilant. You watch TV news more than you used to, or check Google News every few hours. You may scrutinize suspicious-looking people in nearby cars, restaurant booths, airplane seats. You wonder what that white powder might be and consider whether you should notify the authorities. Bullet point 3. You personalize the risk. You imagine what it would be like if it were you. If a risk that is already hurting others and may be coming your way were actually here now. You may even imagine that it is actually here now. Bullet point 4. You take extra precautions that are probably unnecessary or at least premature. You go out for Mexican food instead of Chinese food if you're worried about SARS, or Chinese food instead of Mexican food if you're worried about hepatitis. And the article continues, these responses are a sign of what psychiatrists call an adjustment reaction. They are part of the process of adjusting to the new risk. Here are the key characteristics of the adjustment reaction to crises. 1. It is automatic. That is, it's not entirely under your conscious control. Critics may seize on this characteristic, ridiculing the adjustment reaction as knee-jerk. But notice, please, that the knee-jerk reactions are sometimes preferable to conscious ones in crisis situations, because they're quicker. When your doctor checks your reflexes during a medical exam, the doctor is hoping they're working, knee-jerk and all. It is healthy to pull back automatically after touching a hot stove or almost falling into a hole. You don't want to think about it first. 2. It comes early. We may be in the early moments of a crisis that hasn't yet gotten big or gotten here. We may be experiencing a precursor event, a potential crisis that either will or will not turn into an actual crisis this time. Obviously, it may be a false alarm or the real thing. That's when it's most useful to adjust. A newspaper headline that fear is spreading faster than SARS missed the point. The last thing we want in a crisis that spreads faster than people's concern about. I'm going to say that again. The last thing we want is a crisis that spreads faster than people's concern about it. It is a survival trait to take a risk seriously before it engulfs you. 3. It is temporary. The adjustment reaction is a temporary phenomenon that eases the transition to whatever is next. Very few people get stuck in a long-term overreaction. Those who do are said by psychiatrists to have an adjustment disorder and may need clinical help. The rest of us overreact only briefly. Then the threat passes and we stop taking precautions, or we settle into the new normal, a longer-term state of preparedness, or the growing crises makes our early reaction appropriate. 4. It is a small overreaction. The adjustment reaction is excessive mostly because it is technically premature, not because it's disproportionate. If and when the actual crisis arrives, the level of reaction and more may well become standard, even mandatory. If the adjustment reaction is way out of proportion, not just to what is happening so far, but also to what could happen, it is an adjustment disorder. But it may be a little out of proportion. When you pull back from accidentally touching a hot stove, your reflex briefly moves you farther from the stove than is actually needed to avoid getting burned. 5. It may need guidance. Adjustment reactions shouldn't be disproportionate, but that doesn't mean they are necessarily well-informed and well-chosen. People who decide to wear a mask because of a SARS outbreak or a chemical release not only tend to put it on sooner than they need it, they may also be wearing the wrong mask or wearing it incorrectly. They may need guidance on how best to act on their fear, on which precautions are wisest. 6. It serves as a rehearsal. The adjustment reaction is an emotional rehearsal, getting you psychologically ready to cope if you have to. It is also a logistical rehearsal. It's how you start figuring out what to do and how to do it. The value of rehearsing, emotionally and logistically, explains why premature isn't such a devastating criticism. You can't rehearse after the show starts. People who have gone through a successful adjustment reaction are better prepared to cope with the crises when it comes. 7. It reduces the probability of later overreaction. This is the most paradoxical payoff. Because they have rehearsed, because they are better prepared and feel better prepared, people who have gone through a successful adjustment reaction are less likely to overreact to an actual crisis that follows. In this sense, an adjustment reaction functions a little like an inoculation. Just as important, people who have gone through a successful adjustment reaction tend to notice more quickly and recover more quickly when the crisis is over, or when a threatened crisis has failed to materialize. Moving on, the article goes to, "This is the teachable moment. Instead of criticizing or ridiculing people's adjustment reactions to emerging crises, smart crises communicators encourage the adjustment reactions, legitimize them, ally with them, and guide them. It's okay to tell people that they're jumping the gun a little, that there is still time, and you advise them to hold off on particular precautions until the risk gets closer, bigger, or clearer. It's okay to recommend substitute precautions, precautions that are more useful or less burdensome or less likely to backfire than the ones they're attracted to. It's okay to remind them that nobody knows yet whether the situation will worsen or blow over, that they should try to stay poised to ramp up or ramp down their level of concern. That's all part of guiding the adjustment reaction. What isn't okay is to suggest that people shouldn't be worried yet, that they shouldn't take any precautions or even think about what precautions they want to take until you give the word. It isn't okay to tell people that their normal and useful impulse to rehearse is irrational or panicky. Healthy people are going to rehearse. They are going to imagine the worst before it happens and before we know for sure it's coming. They are going to take premature precautions. An adjustment reaction is a big improvement over being caught unawares. Don't try to tell people not to have one. Help them have a good one. And he closes with a note, "My wife and colleague Jody Lannard, MD, introduced me to the psychiatric concept of adjustment reactions. Most of this column is adopted from previous writing by both of us." So there you have the article that some of what Brooke and I will be talking about today is centered around. And it's worth pondering this. And let's see if Brooke and I have anything to add.
Well, I think for me, the importance of this piece, again, is a vernacular, a model of looking at something that we all go through that gives us an orientation piece. When we can orient it to what we're in, it makes us easier. It makes it easier for us to be able to navigate that piece. And, to me, when I was looking at this and starting to break it down, I talk a lot about with my clients, with my students, and in these podcasts, about catastrophic thinking. And catastrophic thinking is also oftentimes part of that adjustment reaction. There's something coming, it's bigger than what I think, or it may not be bigger than what I think, but I'm having this larger than life reaction to it. And I may start a sequence of thoughts, or I may start a sequence of actions that,
or emotions,
absolutely, internal stuff that is bigger than what's required. But if I can see that I'm in this and I've got this process going on, I can start to go to that place, Eric, that you talk about, and you taught me about years ago, about don't just do something, sit there and just kind of easing it back and coming into some level of sense making with it. Okay, is this where I need to be? Are these things that I need to start to take care of? But I think what Peter's talking about here is not discarding the impulse to overreact, but to actually bring that information in as a part of the process of disseminating where it is I need to go and what it is that I need to do. And I think part of what he's saying in this and what we've talked about is this impulse is an automatic piece. It's an involuntary that comes in, and when we're in that, we're out of orientation to what's actually here in the moment. And this concept, I think, helps us bring us back into that orientation.
Yeah, I think word orientation is really key in this, because in the somatic experiencing work of Peter Levine and Stephen Porges, orienting is a key piece of navigating overwhelming experience. And what we're pointing to with this adjustment reaction, especially in these cultural and worldwide overwhelming experiences that we're navigating, we get fractal levels of disorientation. And so becoming skilled at reorienting to perhaps a new reality, or reorienting back into, wow, we dodged that bullet, is really a tricky game to play for many of us, especially where we have trauma histories or poor attachment in our childhoods, because we don't really know what orienting feels like in the first place. So we have this very profound trick that gets played on us, which really amounts to ordinary people that don't have big trauma or attachment injury histories getting overwhelmed and disoriented and sometimes struggling to come back to reality. And then the people that have trauma and attachment injuries get really spun very often. And so I think the different coping mechanisms that have shown up with COVID and with, the January 6th dilemma. Today is June 8th. The hearings start tomorrow. So that's going to be an interesting dilemma that gets pinged on our country.
That's going to bring a lot of people right into this.
That's right.
Regardless of where they stand on any of this, it's
that's right.
That ping of strong energy that I have to go do something. I have to get something. I have to protect something. I've got to do.
Or I have to drink more, or, like I have to watch Airplane and remember Peter Graves saying, I picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue. It's like those kinds of orientation, attempts to navigate overwhelm in our orientation by numbing behaviors or addictions, or, there's so many different things. And I would guess that some people that are having a lot of political vigor in their life right now are attempting to make sense of the disorientation that they're navigating through blame on conspiracies or the other political party, or on many, many different things. There's a lot of different ways that people are coming up with pseudo solutions, in part because they don't understand what we're talking about here.
So let's funnel this down a little bit, because we've got a really broad conversation going out here. And I'd like to funnel this down so people can start to see a little bit more of what their day-to-day stuff might be looking like as well. Mm-hmm. We've talked about world events, we've talked about political events. And we're also dealing with our clients, both of us, personal and interpersonal events that are taking place as well. And there are threats that are real and perceived in each one of these things that we're doing with our clients. And a lot of the stuff that I know that clients that we both share together in some of this process are going through this notion, I think, of getting ready to get ready in some ways, and also this crash that has come in, and there's been an event that has sparked this catastrophic thinking that has set forth actions of, what do I do? The overwhelm, my children are in dire need of help, and that may or may not be true, depending on what the perceptive reality is. And that, I've talked to them a lot about, this notion, and I'm gonna bring this back to what we're talking about today, but this catastrophic thinking as that initial part of that adjustment reaction. And then what I've done, and I've been a little dualistic in this, and I want to name that right now, is that is a legitimate piece, and the catastrophic thought sets forth a set of what can I do to keep this from happening, or to keep this from happening again. And I think that process, to Peter Sandman's point in this, is it's a legitimate alley to go down, to really start to look at all of those things and then breathe back into, okay, what are the appropriate things, and what are the things that we can do that aren't going to backfire? So to bring in some sense making to that whole process, to really be able to organize the chaos that comes with that initial reaction, and to be able to move back and forth with it.
Right. Well, and I think it's also kind of part of the context here to look at adjustment reaction is the way that we're talking about it thus far is action. How do I, what is the reaction and action to try and protect myself from COVID, from zombie apocalypse, from whatever? And I think there are other more kind of gray or less visible reactions that include, moving more into addiction, moving more into numbness and dissociation and Netflix, and, putting their fingers in their ears and covering their eyes and just trying to act like nothing's happening, and, ignoring it. And I think that is also an adjustment reaction, and it makes sense. It's not necessarily helpful. And, that's tricky. How do we navigate that? And, the other conversation that I bring in through my work and my writing is this notion of the context of intrapersonal, interpersonal, and omnipersonal. And where I think, if I have some intrapersonal, for instance, the parts conversation, internal family systems, and where I have parts that are stuck in the past in states or situations that might get pinged by the helplessness that gets, that happens in this time and place, and it leads me into a flashback state. And so navigating that and orienting to that and helping those parts feel safe and feel self's presence, like where I can go and really just go, oh yeah, I've got a part that's freaking the hell out right now, that is stuck in a hard situation that happened when I was 7. And to help that part feel my presence as self, power, love, and presence. And then where, if I have some handle on that then I can be there with my partner or my kids or the interpersonal realm in a way that's more effective, and I can get oriented to what's happening in the world in the omnipersonal level more effectively as well. And if I don't get a handle on that intrapersonal piece first, and I try and solve things by protesting this or that, and, having a theory or pursuing or engaging in a theory that might be a conspiracy theory that gives me some pseudo solutions for those intrapersonal dilemmas that I'm stuck in unconsciously, that's going to go nowhere helpful in the long run.
I think, the piece about working the parts first is really important, because oftentimes when we're not conscious of that piece that's there, that's the piece that's driving the adjustment reaction. It's in adjustment reaction outside of being in self. So to come into that orientation first and go, is this real time, or is this other piece that's in it, becomes that first solution of orienting to what's really going on. And I think the value of working with the other person that you're in adjustment reaction to, perhaps, is being able to orient to their being in adjustment reaction. So that interpersonal piece of being able to orient to other in their state as well, and being able to hold and not going into our own adjustment reaction with them to be able. So
right, or at least being able to track that part of my reaction to my partner or my kids is fueled by my historical traumas or neglects. And that's, at least you've got a level of conscious incompetence of what you're navigating, and you can kind of take your foot off their back a little bit because of that self-awareness. And that's not easy to do.
And coming back to, I like to keep coming back this with my clients, with my students, with everybody that's listening to this stuff over and over and over again, is the value of being able to orient, is the value of being able to slow this down enough to come into, I can not have to jump here. I don't have to jump into whatever my impulse is. I remember recently, getting really triggered about somebody in my office, and just running out and wanting to look at finding another office. That was that big piece. And I actually got out, and I went out and I was looking for office space and what have you. And when I came back into, well, I don't need to move. I can change what I'm doing internally. And because I didn't go to each step of unplugging from where I was at, I didn't have to go back and do repair with my landlord in terms of, I really don't want to leave and all of this other stuff. But there was a movement of action into making some change, but not having to just go boom and do it. So some of this adjustment reaction is going to be, I'm going to start movement. When we came into COVID, I remember working with, talking with you like we do so frequently. And it's like, yeah, this is coming. You want to start looking at this. And I was sitting back going, I've been through SARS before. I've seen this stuff before. I've gotten on planes before. And then it started to grow with more orientation to what you were talking about. And, suddenly stuff's flying off of the shelves at the stores, and everybody's in overreaction to toilet paper and all of this other stuff. But to come back into, okay, what do I really need here? What is important here? Home sanitizers, these other things that we didn't know about, to get things in, to keep things safety, getting some masks, doing these other things. And some of the stuff that you and I did wasn't necessary.
But we didn't know that.
But we didn't know that. And the fact that we did what we did let our system settle a little bit more. And then at the end of it, we could look back and go, that wasn't an overreaction. That was actually an appropriate movement. And I have some excess now, but it also allowed me to settle better as I was going through the crisis. So this notion, I think, and I love the model that we're talking about with adjustment reaction, because when I'm working with so many of my clients, it's like, we don't know what's going to happen next. But if we put these things in place and it unfolds in this manner, we're prepared. And if it doesn't
Right.
unfold in this manner, we may have spent a little extra money. We may have done some things that weren't necessary, but damn it, we navigated this easier.
Right. Right. I think an addendum to this that we could talk about more on another podcast perhaps is the methodologies of scenario planning.
Yes.
Like where okay, we don't know what's going to happen, but what are the possibilities here? What are the most important moving parts of what's happening? And we can look at that, in the context of a pending divorce, or in, a pending, change in national laws, or in
Economy.
planetary disease or economy or whatever. And what are the most important questions? And what if we take two of those questions and put them on a grid, each of them less or more, and then now we have less of one and more of the other, or less of both or more of both, and like what, and enter that and imagine what that might look like, and how do we navigate that? How do we prepare for that? And corporations and banks and governments do this scenario planning all the time. It is a major component of sense making that they do, and it's a little heady until you get the hang of it, and then once you kind of get it, it's like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And you can have a very catastrophic combination in your scenario possibilities, and kind of discern like, oh, okay, I need, if I'm going to try and help, if those things happen, I need to do this one or two things that I can do without completely ruining my life.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a little bit like, it translates a little bit into how all of us, in one way or another, we buy insurance. And this notion in insurance that we win if we need the insurance. And we lose if we don't need it. We just blew all that money on insurance that we didn't need. And most of us, if we think about it, we understand that. Sometimes we might just be really resentful that we have to have insurance. But to be in that kind of preparatory and orientation mode of that makes sense. It's like if your marriage is in a struggle and you're completely freaked out that you might, end up divorced, and, you've been soccer mom or soccer dad and you don't have income, what might you do to kind of prepare for that on some level? And, that's not to say that you're preparing for the marriage to blow up, but kind of getting your wheels on the ground for that makes sense. And it's not catastrophic thinking.
No.
It's preparation. It's common sense. It's like, all right, I'm going to do that. And so go ahead.
Yeah. And I think the important piece of all of this, again, is when you're in this big reaction, how do you take in your information? Who do you go to get your information for the preparations that you want to do? And so a lot of us have orientations to particular belief systems that are out there, and we get our information from particular places. And if that's all we do in our preparations, we're probably not going to get everything in line that we need to get in line. And this, I keep coming back to the sense-making piece of when we are in reaction, we typically aren't in sense-making. I'm moving to do something just to do something, and somebody said this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to orient to this.
We're in the pinball sense of life.
Yes. And when we're in this, what we want to really be able to do is look at where we're getting our information, understand what our belief systems are that are false belief systems in some of this process, and spread this stuff across in a brainstorm type of a scenario making thing, like you said, and really start to pull this misinformation or this misguided belief apart from all of it. And I don't think we can do that unless we put it all on the table.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think we can do that if our systems are redlined or worse. And how do we navigate that? And do we have an ally or a number of allies that can help us resource and help us be in relationship and company and connection while we're navigating this very hard stuff? And I think what a lot of people have done is isolated. And the isolation process, and this is, again, I'm not talking just about COVID. I'm talking about, all of the omnipersonal levels of the world going on, but also our own, relationships and our own struggles, our own finances, our own, and our own histories and the way that those are pinging. It's so, I would even say it's not so hard. I would say it's impossible to navigate this stuff by ourselves. And to have that kind of support, this is kind of I talk a lot about power, love, and presence. This is the love component of the solution. And the presence is the sense making that we're talking about. Like, how do we make sense of all this stuff? And the power is like, how do I have agency in this? And, how do I feel powerful in the midst of really overwhelming, difficult experiences?
And when we
and threats.
Right. And when we can't orient to self in those aspects, mm-hmm. we need outside input. We need community. We need a therapist. We need that community to be able to say, hey, let's pull this apart a little bit.
Right.
So you can begin to orient to it. Because when we're disoriented and we don't have a touchstone, what the hell are we orienting to?
Right.
More chaos.
Right. Yeah. And, and then if we have company that we're keeping and they're freaking out in a different way, which is totally fine, but if we don't get oriented to them freaking out in ways that are actually destructive, that are not in sense making, because a lot of that's been going around where people are, coming up with conclusions that are based on untruths or propaganda or whatever, and where that gets really wonky and overwhelming. And, I've done some cult deprogramming with clients over the years, and I've been on the fringe of a couple of cults myself. And, the way that we get sucked into different ways of thinking and seeing and making sense, if you will, is so tricky and so confusing. And, we're now in a world where I don't remember what the saying is, but truth is an opinion or something like that. And it's like where that becomes very problematic in relationship. So here we have this interpersonal need that may actually be throwing fuel on the fire if we are not in some degree of presence and sense making and learning, fallacies. Like when all this started a couple years ago, I bought like 10 decks of cards. I don't think I have one on here, but it's like learning the logical fallacies, because I'm like, damn, this is really challenging to understand, and it's challenging for some people to recognize logical fallacies. And so I was handing out these decks of fallacy cards so that people could learn it. And as it happened, the ones that might probably needed it the most wouldn't even open the deck. And that's really challenging in the realm of sense making, and using sense making to help us navigate adjustment reaction and adjustment disorder. I think there are a lot of people that are really stuck in understanding sense making that don't have the tools to come out of it, and they get stuck. They actually probably are heading towards or in adjustment disorder because of their poor sense making.
And I would say that, for a large part of my clientele, especially those people that are in the early stages of separation, divorce, and it's a high conflict arena, that many of them are either in or headed toward adjustment disorder for some level of time or distancing, especially if they don't have the touchstones that they need to come back and orient, to sense make, to scenario plan, and to put things, if I've got a plan, then my brain is functioning on a plan and it's not out and scattered. And
right.
All the other inputs, all the crazy making, all the what's going to happen to the kids. I don't have enough money. I'm going to lose all my money. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose it. And then they start to unravel.
Mm-hmm.
And
where likely those notions for many of scarcity have nothing to do with the, gazillions of dollars that they have, but much more to do with their childhood, where they were starving and their parents were feeding them,
right.
nothing.
Right.
And where they're stuck in that, or they watch their parents be in shame of being in poverty.
So that adjustment disorder is manageable at some point, to come back into the scenario planning, the brainstorming, the having these pieces together to, again, orient. And the disorder has to do with disorientation.
Right.
It's a hard one.
It's very hard. And there's just, and I think part of why Brooke and I are talking today about this is because both of us have our sense-making radar up that this is getting worse. This is getting worse on the planet. And, I don't know how quickly, like how much it's going to get worse in our lifetimes. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen in the next not very long of getting worse. And, and that's not even looking at climate change, although that keeps surprising scientists. They're like, wait, this wasn't supposed to happen for 60 more years. And that I've seen that happen like 6 times now in the last couple years. So that's really intense. And the effects of all of that on us are going to be devastating. And, famine and World War and possibly Civil War. And
we've got to be able to manage the little things in order to be able to manage the big things. We have to have a skill set.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I talk to you about often that is a little tricky, but I think very important, which is my recognition that, okay, let's say one of the scenarios is that things are going to hell in a handbasket. And, where the initial response of that, of many people, are like, wow, if that is happening, I'm just going to step off the planet. Or what I'm pointing towards is, let's say that that's going on for a while, and how do I make the best of that? How do I become, like how do I enjoy my life? Even though things are really messed up out there, and how do I connect, and how do I, how can I be in service even though things are not looking good out there? And how do I play and feel pleasure and enjoy nature and, do all of these resourcing things and have that as the chosen orientation that I have?
Right. Right.
And
Because
that's easy to say, and it's not easy to do when you keep getting pummeled.
and doing it in the face of being pummeled,
Right.
being in that adjustment reaction and coming back to being present for, and I can choose to be just on fire, or I can bring back to where I am right now and what I can do right now. What is it that is here that keeps me in the things that are important to my soul, the things that are important to make connection with, the things that are important for the pleasure, the orienting to, all of that, that by and large, if we can find that arena, are an antidote to all of this other stuff that we're talking about. There's that place of, I'm not on fire, I'm okay. Oh, I have this person here in front of me that loves me, that I enjoy, that we're connected with, that we can go on walks, we could go to the beach, we could do the things that I'm here to do. And as this other stuff unfolds, I have to be also in reality of that unfolding as well, and continuing to make adjustments to the here
Right.
and now.
And I think you're touching on this component of it of, I talk to people often and they're like, "Oh, I just don't watch the news anymore." And there's a, ostrich mode of navigating that. The ostrich strategy of sticking your head in the sand and going, I'm not looking. And what I'm finding and my practice, I watch some news every day. And I read things like Heather Cox Richardson and, people that I find objective, at least in my limited orientation of what that means. And I'm often like with Uvalde and all of that, like beholding what happened there had me weeping every day.
Oh my God, yes. And
And
still,
where I, like a lot of people I know are just like, I'm not dealing and I'm not going to look and I'm just going to turn off the TV and the news. And which is what I did when 9/11 happened. Like I had 48 hours when 9/11 happened where I watched the news almost 24/7. And I had at that point a woman that I was dating who had, she was in an office that had, or in a company that had offices in the World Trade Center. And she was losing her mind because a bunch of people that she worked with and were friends with were no longer here. And it was too much for me. And I stopped watching the news regularly up until, in the last couple years. And now I'm committing to being present with what's going on and having a good life, despite keeping my eyes open and seeing what's happening. And I get the tension field of that. And it's a duality that I'm facing. But I'm looking for the space, this mystical space in between the horror and the beauty that I have some access to some of the time. And I keep seeking my way towards that. Because the other two options are not realistic. And holy crap, that's a lot to seek holding both of those, and I'm aware of that. And I think this whole conversation about adjustment reaction can support such things.
Well, it brings us into another level of consciousness, doesn't it? It really ups the game, but it also requires more energy and commitment to hanging in this. It's this recognizing it and then traversing it are two very different things. And I know that the people that are listening to our podcasts are people that are committed to doing things differently, are committed to changing. They wouldn't be coming here and listening to us doing this if they weren't committed to trying to better their ability to traverse whatever it is that they're in.
Right.
And this constantly, I know this is true for me, and it pisses me off, is that
That's why you're willing to pick up the phone in the morning.
Right. I just have to keep upping my game and trusting my system to be resilient enough to navigate this stuff and to have the community around me, to have the resources around me, that when I can't, I got somebody that can pull me up by my hair and keep me from drowning long enough to get my feet back on the ground. So, and you're one of those people. I mean, that's what we do.
Right.
And we need to have that. Is there anything that you feel that we haven't hit here other than everything that we have time to hit here before we close?
Well, I would just say that this topic that we've brought today is likely to have some level of adjustment reaction to it itself. And so be aware of that. And, we're kind of pushing you or inviting you into a pretty uncomfortable level of reality. And it is reality nonetheless. It's not like, just our ideas. We are trying to orient to a reality that is uncomfortable. And
realities.
Yeah, it's many realities. And, it's like the levels of overwhelm that are possible here are infinite. And I think another component of this conversation that we haven't had that this is a bookmark for is that when COVID first happened, there was a lot of hope on the planet that the leadership would ally in ways that it hasn't. Like the planets, like all of the people, the leaders, the politics would come into an alignment and be working together rather than against each other. And that didn't happen. In fact, as it seems, there's been actually more conflict and more separation. But I think there is the possibility of something happening down the pike where that does happen. Like something coming out of left field that is just so intense and shocking that it will bring us into alignment. I'm often, referring to the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, where she's this person who listens on these satellite dishes or not even satellite, like star listening dishes in New Mexico desert, and gets the message from some aliens that turns into, blueprints for some kind of spacecraft. And the only way that it could be built was through the unification of all of the governments in the country to come together and do that. And that's a beautiful notion and possibility. And, I think there are people out there that, to use the phrase out there is some shit out there that we don't know or we don't understand that could have a converse or a different result than us all going crazy and losing our minds and the species ending. But maybe there's an adjustment reaction that we might need to have of like, wow, we made it and we're all getting along now. And how beautiful is that? And I don't know if I can handle that. Like, or we can have a freak out about that. And
that would be a better freak out, wouldn't it?
It would be a better freak out, but it could be too much for a lot of people.
Well, we've got so much diversity in terms of thoughts and beliefs, and you know, for us to come together, we've got to have conversation. We've got to continue to do the things that we do, and we've got to be open to other people's adjustment reactions and understanding what we're all going through to be able to do that. And for those of us that are having this conversation, for those of us that are listening to these types of things and trying to move forward in it, I think that's our intention. And this can move outwards in terms of it. And when we hit the resistance, when we hit somebody else's reaction, that if we're able just to stand in that and just to be in that, to be in our own, to be in theirs, is what we're aiming for here.
Right.
So I think
it's a lofty goal, but I think it's extraordinarily valuable.
I think it's an important piece to at least strive for.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. I think this is a good place for us to roll.
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for coming back again and again and again to these podcasts that we do. I want to thank you, Eric, again for, you know, having this commitment to your own process, to your own podcast, to join me in these co-creations and to get this stuff out there. Mm-hmm. Anybody that is listening to my podcast here, Eric, would you tell them how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Unveiling Self, and you can find that on soon, starting in July, I believe it will be launched. And in the meantime, you can find it at unveilingself.com. And you know, that's one way. And then the other is my personal site, which is ericsjoberg.com, ericsjoberg.com. And yeah, so those are probably the most easy access points to contact with me. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Brooke, for doing this with me again, and for inspiring me to continue working on launching my podcast, and for being my friend, and for kind of sitting with me in some of this kind of deep dives that I tend to play in. And I really appreciate it. And I appreciate people out there that are willing to listen to this, both on my podcast and on Brooke's, where kind of most of our conversations are broadcast on both of our podcasts. So I get to speak to some of the high conflict custody and divorce population, and Brooke gets to talk to my kind of IFS and whatever other crazy shit that I come up with population. So it's good to do this, and yeah, again, thank you all for hanging out with this topic with us today, because it's an edgy one, and do something nice for yourself later if you feel a little overwhelmed by it.
Go play, find joy.
Right. Cool.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.
Bye.
Brooke, people don't have to wait until Friday mornings to get more content. If this is something that's helpful for them, right? This isn't the first time you've broadcast anything or recorded anything or put anything out there in the world. What are the other ways people can get the help more aggressively or speed up their recovery process? What materials are available for people right now?
Well, I've written a book called The Black Hole of High Conflict, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle.
Great.
And everything that we're talking about is really compressed and put into there. So this is a really good starter place to get in and get your mind working and to see what these concepts are about and how to start to apply them. The other place that I think that is valuable is to go to our website and look at some of the blog articles that I've written. Those are available there as well. If they go into some of these other arenas, and that's at www.highconflict.net. So the book, the website are also really good places to get the material. And also we have classes. We have high conflict diversion program classes that you can get into and get some one-on-one help with this as well.
And you know me, I'm aggressive. Whatever I want to become good at or learn, I find someone who's good at it and pay them and hire them and shorten my learning curve. What if somebody just wants your help? Somebody says, Brooke has this information. He's good at something I'm not good at yet, and I want to work with him. Do you have any type of coaching or consultations or anything like that?
Absolutely, I do. I do one-on-one coaching for custody cases. I help people get ready for family court services. If you've got that in your community, I work with attorneys and clients to help them with managing and strategically setting them up to have more successful cases as well.
And how do they reach out? You want them to just go to the website or email or phone, or what's the best way for them to reach out, raise their hand, and say, I need some help?
They can email me. My direct email is brooke@highconflict.net. That's BROOK at highconflict, HIGH, conflict.net.
Perfect. That's everything everybody would need to get some help, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brooke.